Beautiful Anonymous changes each week. It defies genres and expectations. For example, our most recent episode, I talked to a woman who survived a murder attempt by her own son. But just the week before that, we just talked the whole time about Star Trek. We've had other recent episodes about sexting in languages that are not your first language, or what it's like to get weight loss surgery. It's unpredictable, it's real, it's honest, it's raw. Get Beautiful Anonymous wherever you listen to podcasts.
Why is Gen Z embracing socialism? That was the headline of a January 2025 U.S. News and World Report commentary piece based on surveys and studies. And that's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt. And I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. Why is Gen Z embracing socialism? U.S. News asks. Trendy campus slogans, the author writes, ignore the oppression, suffering, and slaughter by communist regimes. It's time to get real about history. And that, in essence, in a nutshell, is a big reason why younger generations in America don't understand, first off, the core concept of American exceptionalism, that it's rooted in the idea of individual rights and liberties coming from God, and that government is only put in place to secure and protect and preserve those individual rights that come from a creator. Read your Declaration of Independence. That was the founders' marching orders for the creation of the government system that we have in place still today. So that, in essence, is the nutshell. They not only don't understand American exceptionalism, but they're not taught it, right? They're taught that the ideas, the ideals, the principles of American exceptionalism are what have caused all the problems, not just in America, but around the world. Civics lessons, that's where the answer lies. Put back into Americans' public school system, into America's public school systems, requirements for civics lessons, truthful teaching about U.S. history, and the application, not to mention reading, right, of the U.S. Constitution. And let's get rid of all the DSA promoted teachers, Democrat Socialists of America teachers that the DSA has actively pushed into the school system, because, of course, even socialists can teach the Constitution. They just do it with their own socialist way of thinking. They do it by saying the General Welfare Clause allows them to stretch every big government program into a biggest government program as possible. So we need the proper teachers put in place in school, but then we also need the proper curriculum in order to stave off this growing affection for socialism that we have largely seen carried by the ignorant youth in America. Before I get into more of that, I want to quickly mention, if you like Bold and Blunt, you may get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, at Real Life Network. That is the news arm of Pastor Jack Hibbs's Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills. Did I say that properly? That's always a tongue twister for me. Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills, out in California. And you know what else? I always get it messed up with the military cavalry, right? Bring in the cavalry. Anyhow, Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills, out there in California. They have an excellent news outreach. It's called Real Life Network, and I would encourage you to sign up for it and become a member. It's free. But what it does is you have all these news outlets, including Bold and Blunt. I was graciously adopted into their Real Life Network family, and now my Bold and Blunt podcast goes forth through that platform as well. But they have a wide range of Christian-based and faith-based news videos and podcasts and just all kinds of offerings that come at what's taking place today from a biblical worldview, from a faith-based worldview, which is really at the root of how you should be viewing the happenings and the occurrences of today, right? If you just watch news, especially under the Joe Biden administration, if you just watch news, if you read news, if you listen to news, it was dark, 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 right? The enemies of freedom were just throwing darts here, throwing knives there, starting fires here, and not to mention sending their minions into the street to hurl bricks into storefront windows and Molotov cocktails at police vehicles. But everywhere you looked, listened, and watched, it was dark, dark, perilous times. But if you happen to be grounded in biblical truths and you happen to understand how biblical truths are playing out today, yes, today, right? These aren't just stories from the past. They are active and alive, taking place on today's global stage. Then you don't get as dark. You don't get as gloomy. You don't need those meds that so many of our youth are being fed today, too. Coincidentally, at the same time, they're believing that socialism actually works, which, maybe the meds are messing with their minds and making them more pliable to the messages of the DSA chosen in our public school systems. But I digress. Back to Bold and Blunt. You may also get it at WashingtonTimes.com, where you can sign up for my 3 times a week newsletter, Bold and Blunt with Cheryl Chumley. Just enter your email box in the newsletter section. Enter your email address in the Bold and Blunt box in the newsletter section, and you will get delivered to your email 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, my newsletter, and it contains my commentaries I write, as well as my Bold and Blunt podcasts, both video and audio versions. And you can also get Bold and Blunt wherever podcasts are available. I'd like to say that it was just rated as one of the top 100 political podcasts out there. So if you aren't an active listener, if you're just tuning in for the first time, check out my past episodes, sign up, subscribe. If not at the Washington Times, you can do it, anywhere else it's available, and listen for a little bit, see why it was rated within the top 100 political podcasts. Let me go back to this U.S. News report. Why is Gen Z embracing socialism? That is the question on the table. It actually opens with a little bit of a personal narrative, which I read, and it was interesting enough that I want to read it to you as well. Growing up in Minneapolis in the 2000s, this author writes, my sister's brother and I weren't always picture-perfect children. One day, my siblings and I were acting particularly spoiled, and my dad snapped at our brattiness. Tell them, he said to my mom, tell them how you had to wait in line for hours to buy a roll of toilet paper. And lest you start to tune out thinking this is one of those stories where when I was a kid, when I went to school, I had to walk to school in 6 foot of snow, up mountains both ways, la-di-da. It's not. It's an actual fact-based story, what socialism brings, what communism breeds. Back to this piece. He, meaning my dad, meaning this author's dad, he could have also pointed to how she had to get cavities filled with no numbing, how she ate bread and butter for lunch every day, how she shared one room with her 2 sisters and grandparents, how she was forced to recite propaganda poems at school, how she was constantly paranoid that all the people around her, including friends and teachers, might be informers to the secret police, COVID people, right? These are the COVID people. If you don't think that this can happen here in America, think how many times some little COVID Nazi came rushing up to you across a 50-foot distance of open, or 50-foot span of open space, to scream at you, get in your face and scream at you, put your mask on, right? These are the people that make up secret police in societies run by communist governments, right? They are in America. They are just subdued at this particular moment because Donald Trump, of course, is in the White House and he ain't playing that. So Joe Biden had his 4 years. Barack Obama had his 8 years of really ratcheting the leftist influences in America and telling them it was okay to go violently protesting in the street, that it was all covered under their First Amendment freedoms, First Amendment rights. But those days are over with. I just want you to think that while you're considering Gen Z's embrace of socialism, and some of you out there are probably shaking your heads, never happened in America. Nope, never happened in America. Well, the secret police of communist countries are the COVID crazies of America, okay? Back to this piece. Or how she endured many other horrors from her childhood in communist Romania that kids living in the United States couldn't begin to imagine. That's because we breathe freedom in America, right? We open our eyes as infants born from our mother's womb, and already we're breathing in liberty and freedom. We don't even recognize it. We don't even call it that. We just take it for granted because we know inherently our rights and liberties come from a creator. That's why we just live so freely. That's why Americans are always laughing and smiling, right? You go to some of these other countries, they're not laughing, they're smiling. They're not laughing or smiling. They're walking around somber, worried that some one of their neighbors is going to dime them out to the government, right? To some bureau, to some specially created commission to make sure all their citizens are marching in order and not saying anything in dissension to the government's narrative. They're not laughing. They're not having fun. Americans do, because we live, breathe, embrace freedom. Only 35 years have passed, U.S. News continues to write, since the Romanian Revolution and the other uprisings that ended communism in Eastern Europe, and yet in that time, too few young Americans have learned about the realities of socialist governments and the absence of freedom and hope that pervades such societies. And here's the money quote coming up, right? Maybe that education gap helps explain the growing popularity of communism and socialism, and the disapproval of capitalism among younger generations. It's a trend that should alarm us for its erasure of history and what it bodes for our nation's future. So true, so true. Those who don't know their history are doomed to repeat their history, right? You still see people walking around on the streets in open air by themselves wearing face masks. Why? Could repeat the history of COVID crazy in America. Just a warning. Back to U.S. News and World Report, whatever the title is, U.S. News. It may be hard for those who lived through the Cold War, to believe, but a higher percentage of 18 to 29-year-old Americans, Gen Z, have a favorable view of socialism than of capitalism, the only age group for which this was true. According to a Pew Research Center survey from 2022, only 40% of American young people have a positive impression of capitalism, while 44% have a favorable view of socialism. Just 15 years ago, here comes the context, right? A Gallup poll found that 2/3 of millennials and Gen Zers viewed capitalism positively, a share that dropped by 51 to 51% by 2019. So we're seeing a rise in embrace of and favor for socialism, a decline in embrace of and favor for capitalism among America's youth, right? In a way, that sort of makes sense, because youth are all about money grows on trees. Why can't we all just get along and go along and get along and, peace, love, peace, and do your own thing, that kind of thing. And they don't really grasp the importance of money until they have to go out and live on their own, and they have to buy their own socks and trash bags and can openers, right? And towels and toilet paper and things like that. And then they have a water bill, an electric bill, and they realize that their car insurance in the state that they choose to live in is outrageous. That's when all of a sudden they start thinking, maybe socialism does suck. But not all, not all. Some are so conditioned first in the public schools and then at the places of higher learning that have been completely corrupted and overwhelmed by the 1960s protesting anti-Vietnam Marxists, right? That their way of thinking that it's capitalism's fault continues even into their younger days of adulthood, living on their own. Back to the U.S. news and world peace. It's no surprise then that the Revolutionary Communists of America, a party, how is this allowed to be in America, right? Revolutionary Communists of America. You know, if the Intel under Joe Biden had spent more time at the meetings of the Revolutionary Communists of America instead of going to school board meetings to look for parents who protested against transgenders, against boys in girls' locker rooms, then maybe our country wouldn't have been in such dark times for 4 years under Joe Biden. Just saying. Anyhow, this party is committed to the complete overthrow of capitalism, and it says it has doubled its membership nationally and received more than 6,000 new online member applications over the last 16 months. Though still a fringe group, its growth is alarming. Such drifts don't come from nowhere. Students across the U.S. are being influenced by teachers and peers who embrace communism. Okay, so we've seen the surveys. This isn't the only one, right? About youth embracing socialism, embracing communism, and opposing capitalism. We've seen that over the last few years. The reason that I'm bringing this one up and reading from this particular piece and referencing this particular finding and study and data is that it's January 2025. In other words, it's still a big threat. The White House may have changed, but all you have to do is look around at these Democrat-controlled states and cities and communities and jurisdictions and see that they are actively opposing any type of implementation of America First, Make America Great Again policy and agendas, which is also in line with American exceptionalism. And they are putting their foot down, or actually putting their boots down, their boot stomping, good time boots down, and saying, no, we want boys to go into girls' sports here. And gosh darn it, we don't care if the president, the Justice Department, and the deep state come down and breathe down our necks. We're going to go to our graves if need be, fighting for the rights of boys to go to the bathroom in girls' bathrooms and play in girls' sports. So in other words, the socialism has not gone away. The Democrats are actively continuing the fight to bring socialism, communism, collectivism into America. And the education of our youth is of utmost crucial importance. Civics, proper civics, taught by properly civically minded teachers who understand the truthful originations of American exceptionalism. And you know what? Let's throw a little Bible teaching in the school too. That'll really get them going. Anyhow, my guest today has written a book about the perils of socialism and also outlined some of its origins in America and assessed the level of threat. And guess what? It ain't over. It ain't over. Socialism's still a big threat, not just from this U.S. News and World Report that I was reading, but also what this author and scholar says. J.T. Young, thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. It is so great to have you here.
I really appreciate it, Cheryl. I enjoy your podcasts, and I enjoy your columns in the Washington Times. So it's an honor to be here.
Oh, that's really nice of you to say. And I so look forward to talking about your new book about socialism in America, because that's been a hot point for me for years. Unprecedented assault, how big government unleashed America's socialist left. I love the historical perspective this book seems to offer. Where did we go wrong in America?
Well, I think the origin of the book really basically, looks at so many of the questions that we see today, and that I'm sure confounds you and so many of our listeners here, of all these movements that just seem like you would think they're aberrations, and then you see them going on and on and another after another, that they become a continuation. If you scratch the surface, you find the socialist left either a direct participant or running parallel to their agenda in these movements. So I think, to your question as to where we went wrong, is that for over 130 years, America had a small government model. And really, that model was finally fully destroyed, I think, in the Great Society, where the government it has grown to such an extent that now the socialist left, that could never have created this government on their own, now has access to a large government that already exists.
So, in your book, are you saying that the big government came before the socialism, or was it the socialist mindset of those, say, in the Democrat Party who ushered in the big government, leading to more socialism?
Now, I say that in contrast to every other country in the West, and America has always been somewhat unique in its relationship with socialism compared to the rest of the world, where we had no socialist left in any effective way for the vast majority of our history. It didn't mean the socialist left didn't try to exist. They did, and they failed repeatedly. And the book goes into those failures. But abroad, you would see the socialist parties get into power and create a big government. And this book argues it's just the opposite here, that the socialist left never got political traction. It never won elections. Instead, what's happened is that the government has grown up, and suddenly what the socialist left could not create in America, now they just merely need to redirect it.
That is really fascinating. And, it reminds me of, I've been in journalism for about 30 years now. And I remember back when Bill Clinton was in office, I had a quick interview at, I think it was like some Democrat event. Maybe it was a convention, I can't recall. But it was with Congresswoman Marcy Kaptur over some issue the Democrats were pushing. And I asked her openly, how is that not socialism? And she ran scared from that term. Look at how fast things have changed now. We have open socialists in Congress.
Yeah, you make an excellent point, Cheryl. And, the book tries to bring a perspective because, like you, I've been watching this for a long time. And we can both remember that there was a time when, at the national presidential level, Democrats ran from the liberal label, just being called a liberal.
Yes.
We still have, if those of us who are alive to see it can never get the picture of Mike Dukakis in the tank out of their mind, but he was desperately trying to get away from the liberal label. And now, to your point, they don't just embrace the liberal label, which I would say they have done since the Obama administration, which that largely rehabilitated what I call the traditional left. But to your point, Bernie Sanders ran 2 primaries, and had the deck not been stacked against him, he would have beaten Clinton in 2016. And to your point, avowed, calls himself a Democrat socialist.
Yeah, it's astonishing, isn't it? And that's interesting. You pinpoint to Barack Obama times, to this quickening of the open embrace of socialism. I agree. That was about the time Tom Perez, who was then chair of the DNC, came out and announced Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez would be the future of the party.
Yeah, and to your point, that was 2018, and I think I think the book makes the argument that the traditional left, with the loss of Hillary Clinton and the establishment left in 2016, which caught them completely by surprise, they had stacked the deck so she would win, that the traditional left became completely unhinged after that. And to your point, the road was open for the AOCs and the squad and members like that to walk into that breach.
So when you look at the landscape of the land, the lay of the land, and you see in the public school system our next generation of leaders being fed a steady rot of anti-Americanism and pro-communism, where does your optimism for America come from?
Another great question, and absolutely agree with you. The socialist left, because of America's exceptionalism, was boxed out throughout the vast history of American society, and they desperately have to go after and overturn the idea that Americans is exceptional. My optimism for this comes from just American history that we can tick off. Every socialist left attempt that has really been made, and they have been, 1820s, after the Civil War, they tried to infiltrate organizations in the U.S. The early 20th century with Eugene Debs running for president. Every time they fail. They fail here, they fail abroad. And at the very core of that is the failure of their economic system. So the book certainly leaves the reader on an optimistic note, a cautionary one, which is just because they inherently fail does not mean they immediately fail. So this is a struggle.
So I want to be optimistic as well. And, ask me on a different day and maybe I will be. But I just finished reading polls about the growing secularism and atheism and all that in America. And I see a link between the rise in socialism and the fall of the faith community in America. Do you? And if you do, talk about the optimism there.
I agree with you. The faith community is under siege. And again, this is one of the pillars that the socialist left needs to overturn, because they don't have a place there either. And that my faith and optimism there would be that the church was born in struggle, and that every religious group, whether it's the Jews who are now being persecuted under the guise of pro-Hamas protests, Christians who find their values being attacked, we have weathered worse and will weather this.
I can take that message. That's a good message. I appreciate that. Let me ask you this, JT. To what extent do you think socialism has swept across America? Because those who see policies and platforms as socialist have failed to call it out as socialist. For instance, like Joe Biden's great college reimbursement, tuition reimbursement giveaway, right? That at root, you could make a case that that's a socialist program. What are some of the sneaky ways socialism has swept through this nation?
They love to go under different guises, and yes, you could say that the struggle against the socialist left is very akin to a guerrilla war. The socialist left will come out when they feel moments of strength, or they miscalculate. If you'll recall, the day after the terrible Hamas attack, the Democrat Socialists of America called a pro-Palestinian rally. And, it was mind-boggling that this could be happening. And they clearly misjudge at least the mood of the whole country, not necessarily the mood of their followers. But to your point, the socialist left will emerge when they feel like they're in a position of strength. Then they will retreat. They love to go under different guises. Progressivism. We're a progressive. We're not socialists. We're progressives. And they love to retreat back into the population, disappear, and hide themselves. And they will emerge when they feel that they are strong enough to do so.
Do you think America's best days are behind her?
I really don't. And I just, one of my favorites was Ronald Reagan. And there was a man of undying optimism. And you think about what he confronted. Turning the country from just some horrendous programs here, facing when I was, growing up, the idea that the Soviet Union could be defeated was unthinkable, honestly. We assumed we were going to be living with this threat for the rest of our lives. And he refused, and I think that is the way when you go back to what conservatives need to do, what Republicans need to do, what people of faith need to do, is to not lose faith in that we are right and we have to pursue this.
And to do a better job of selling the spirit of America, right? Like there's nobility in individualism and individual achievement, and that's sort of been squashed out by the socialist-loving Democrats. Don't you agree?
I agree, and I think one of the tenets that you'll notice from the socialist left, if you will notice, no individual is ever called on to have responsibility.
Right.
The state always will take responsibility for everything. If there's a problem, the state has to fix it. And when you think of America and what we think of as traditional American values, it was assumed that the individual started by, you're going to take care of yourself. You're going to be a productive member of society. The opportunity is going to be there for you to do so. And it's your responsibility to be that. And if you fail to do that, then it was on you. The socialist left turns everything the other way. And the responsibility always is the state's.
Let's just finish up with this, JT. I assume that you took a more historical look in writing your book to give readers the tools they need to understand the roots of socialism in America, with the hope that they could then be educated enough to prevent it from happening again. But what are some of the pragmatic tools an individual can take right now to counter the spread of socialism in America? Because it's a very enticing message, right? Free stuff, everybody's equal.
Right. And it's the siren song of socialism. And it has succeeded incredibly overseas. How many countries have dabbled with it? Bernie Sanders loves to talk about the Nordic model.
Oh, gosh. Yes.
And it doesn't exist. And it doesn't exist. And the Scandinavian countries will be the first to say that. But Bernie Sanders loves to recite that because there is, as you say, there's the siren song of, hey, we'll take care of you. And the state will intervene, will smooth everything out. So I think people who are conservative, Republicans, we need to look at every election. What are we doing? What are the policies that we support? What will a bad policy lead to? Why do we need to oppose this? Why do we need to support this candidate? They've got to look down. The whole idea of following dominoes. Where does this lead? You mentioned the forgiveness of student loans, which on its face is grossly unfair to the majority of the country.
Mm-hmm.
The people who never went to college, the people who have been to college and did their job, which was you took out the loan, you paid the loan back. But we don't see, as you made the connection immediately, was this is the thin edge of the wedge to we're going to give college to everybody. We're going to always forgive loans. We have to look beyond what seems like a deceptively enticing result into where will this lead? What does this truly mean? Who's going to pay for this? What will the consequences be from this action?
And teach the next generation in the way to go, correct? That's the that's the big key right there. J.T. Young, I really want to thank you for this book. It's so timely. It's so crucial. Unprecedented Assault, How Big Government Unleashed America's Socialist Left. I assume it's available everywhere, yes?
You can pre-order it. You are, as always, Cheryl, ahead of the curve.
Well, thank you for saying that, and thank you for coming on Bold and Blunt. I really do appreciate your time.
Certainly. Thank you for having me.
Actually, that pre-order has turned into order. I interviewed JT a little while back, and to be honest, his podcast interview with me got all lost in the shuffle. So I'm glad to bring this interview to you, because socialism is one of the number one threats facing America, and his book is still pertinent right now. Go out and get it. If you want to know how best to fight off socialism in America, well, recognizing that it's not just socialism, right? It's socialism, progressivism, communism, collectivism. It's all one and the same. And as he points out, the Democrat Party is all wound up in those isms, right? They're the party of socialism now. Go out and get a copy. I want to thank you for listening to Bold and Blunt. Remind you, if you like Bold and Blunt, you may get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, at Real Life Network, at WashingtonTimes.com, and of course, wherever podcasts are available. Tune in next time. Meanwhile, don't forget, stay blunt, stay bold.